The night was unusually still, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Jennifer had been planning this escape for weeks. Her parents, strict and overprotective, had always been adamant about her curfew. No late-night outings, no parties, no exceptions. But tonight was different. Tonight she was determined to break free, even if just for a few hours. The party at her friend's house was the talk of the school, and she wasn't going to miss it. She had waited until her parents were asleep, their rhythmic breathing echoing through the quiet house, before she slipped out of her bedroom window, her heart pounding in her chest. The cool night air hit her face as she landed softly on the grass below. She paused for a moment, listening for any signs that her parents had heard her. But the house remained silent, shrouded in darkness. She took a deep breath and started walking, her sneakers barely making a sound on the pavement. The streets were deserted, the only light coming from the occasional street lamp that cast long, eerie shadows on the ground. She pulled her hoodie tighter around her, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping up her spine. She was about halfway to her friend's house when she first noticed it, a faint sound like the low rumble of an engine coming from behind her. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the headlights of a vehicle in the distance. It was an old white van, its paint chipped and rusted in places. She quickened her pace, telling herself that it was just a coincidence, that the van wasn't following her. But the sound of the engine grew louder, closer. Her heart began to race, and she could feel the panic rising in her chest. She turned another corner, hoping to lose the van, but it was still there, its headlights now blindingly bright. Jennifer's mind raced. She couldn't go home. Her parents would kill her if they found out she had snuck out. She couldn't go to the party. It was still too far away. She needed to find a place to hide, somewhere the van couldn't follow. She spotted a row of parked cars up ahead and darted behind one, crouching down and pressing herself against the cold metal. She held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the driver of the van could hear it. The van slowed down and came to a stop right in front of the car she was hiding behind. The engine idled for a moment, and then the driver's side door creaked open. Jennifer's blood ran cold as she saw a man step out of the van. He was tall and thin, with a gaunt face that looked almost skeletal in the dim light. His hair was greasy and unkempt, and his clothes were dirty and torn. But it was his eyes that terrified her the most. They were dark and hollow, like two black pits that seemed to stare right through her. He took a step forward, his boots crunching on the gravel, and Jennifer knew she had to run. She bolted from behind the car, her legs pumping as fast as they could. She could hear the man shouting behind her, his voice harsh and guttural. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She just ran, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She turned down a narrow alley, hoping to lose him, but the sound of his footsteps was still close behind. She could feel the panic rising in her chest, threatening to overwhelm her. She needed to find a place to hide, somewhere he couldn't find her. She spotted a park up ahead, its gates slightly ajar. She darted inside, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of help. But the park was empty, the swings creaking softly in the breeze. She ran towards the trees, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the man's footsteps behind her, getting closer with every second. She ducked behind a large oak tree, pressing herself against the rough bark and trying to make herself as small as possible. She could hear the man's breathing now, heavy and labored, as he searched for her. Jennifer closed her eyes, praying that he would go away. She could feel the tears streaming down her face, but she didn't dare make a sound. She could hear him moving through the trees, his footsteps crunching on the leaves. He was so close now, so close that she could almost feel his breath on her skin. She held her breath, her body trembling with fear. And then, just when she thought he was going to find her, she heard a loud crash from the other side of the park. The man's head snapped towards the sound, and he hesitated for a moment before turning and running towards it. Jennifer didn't waste any time. She bolted from her hiding spot and ran towards the park's exit, her legs burning with the effort. She could hear the man shouting behind her, but she didn't stop. She ran until her lungs felt like they were on fire, until she finally reached the safety of her friend's house. She collapsed on the doorstep, her body shaking with sobs. Her friend opened the door, her eyes wide with shock as she took in Jennifer's disheveled appearance. "What happened to you?" she asked, pulling Jennifer inside. Jennifer could barely speak, her voice choked with tears. "There was a man. He was following me. He almost caught me." Her friend's face paled, and she quickly locked the door behind them. "You're safe now," she said, wrapping her arms around Jennifer. "You're safe." But Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. She knew that the man was still out there, still searching for her, and she couldn't help but wonder if he would find her again. The party was in full swing, the music pounding through the walls and the air thick with the smell of sweat and alcohol. Jennifer tried to lose herself in the crowd, to forget about the man and the terror she had just experienced. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. "We should call the cops," her friend whispered. Jennifer shook her head violently. No cops. My parents, they can't know I was out." Her friend hesitated, but in the end she relented. "All right, we'll take you home." The car ride was silent, except for the sound of Jennifer's ragged breathing. Every passing streetlight cast shifting shadows against the window, and each one sent a fresh wave of fear through her. Was that him on the sidewalk? Was that van up ahead the same one? By the time they pulled up to her house, her stomach was in knots. "You sure you'll be okay?" her friend asked. Jennifer nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "Yeah, thanks." She crept up the front lawn, her ears straining for any sound. The house was dark, still, just as she had left it. With careful, practiced movements, she climbed back up to her window and slipped inside. She stood there for a moment, heart hammering, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Everything was normal, except it wasn't. She moved to lock her window, then froze. There, on her nightstand, sat something that hadn't been there before. A small folded piece of paper. Her blood turned to ice. Hands shaking, she picked it up and slowly unfolded it. Scrawled in jagged, uneven handwriting were 4 words. "I know where you sleep." A sharp gasp caught in her throat. Her entire body went rigid. The window had been locked when she left. The house had been locked. He had been inside. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, the note still clutched in her trembling fingers. She had made it home, but she was far from safe. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying stories that will haunt your nights. And remember, just because you've locked the doors, drawn the curtains, and hidden under the covers doesn't mean you're alone. Some things don't need an invitation to step inside. Sleep well, if you dare. Until next time, stay safe.